those of you who are already logged in, thanks for joining us. And I'll be with you in about 60 seconds or so. Just let people settle in. So thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm just looking on the screen to see my technical guru, Sean, to make sure it's okay to start. And I think we will kick off the meeting. So are we all good to go, Sean? Can I get your thumbs up?
You can take it away, Mike.
Okay, thank you very much. So, friends, colleagues, those of you out there in the unseen land of Zoom, thank you very much for joining us for this, the latest in our series of hugely successful series, we're glad to say, of conversations with decision makers with our speaker today, Deputy Rose-Conway Walsh from Sinn Fein. Just before I introduce the specifics of today, just if you don't mind, just a couple of words, a couple of focal about TASC. As you know, we're the think tank for action for social change, and we are celebrating our 20th year of existence this year. In fact, Uachtar on the Hair and Michael D. Higgins has very kindly offered, as soon as the pandemic allows, to host a reception in Rose-Conway to mark our 20th anniversary. I fear it might become our 21st birthday before it happens, but it will happen. As you know, we concentrate on the issues of inequality in all its forms. It's our specialty. On the extension and deepening of democracy in all its forms, on social inclusion, and particularly in recent years on climate justice and the just transition to for climate change in the interest of all society and to leave nobody behind. As you know, we are 100% independent. We often get described in the media under various names, but we are completely independent, and that makes us a little bit vulnerable. We do require support from our supporters. So just to, without plugging you or being overly explicit about it, just to remind you that we do rely on individuals and organizations who admire us and our work to help us to continue that work. So if you can support us in any way, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And whether you want to support us or not, it would be great if you sign up on our website so we can keep in touch with you and keep you up to date with all developments. Today, as I say, is the latest in the series of our conversations. We have already had a conversation with Leah Varadkar on Taoiseach, with the leader of the Green Party, Eamon Ryan, with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Michael McGrath, with the co-leader of the Social Democrats, Catherine Murphy, and we've had Claire Daly and also Joe O'Brien, Junior Minister. And some upcoming events on the 21st of this month, next week, we'll be launching a very, very important report on conditions of work in the construction sector. And I think we're going to have the Minister, Darragh O'Brien, at that. On the 26th of April, we will have the leader of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald. On the 25th of May, we will have Alan Kelly, the leader of the Labour Party. In June, we're going to have an event hosted by Paddy Cosgrave. You probably know Paddy from the Web Summit. And we are working on arranging a date with the Office of Taoiseach for a date to be confirmed. But today, I'm very, very pleased that we have been joined by Deputy Rose-Conway Walsh, who is the Higher Education and Development spokesperson for Sinn Féin. Rose was formerly a senator and a member of Mayo County Council, and she lives in a part of the country that I know quite well and I'm very fond of. She lives in Belmullet, and we were just discussing before we came on air, so to speak, the distance that one has to travel if you're in your car to get to a meeting from Belmullet, and how sometimes the Zoom does have its compensations, because it's a beautiful place to be, but it's a long way from where too many meetings are centralized in a way. And we asked Rose to provide an insight into how policy on higher education and research should change in the future. And we've suggested that it would be appropriate for her to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, but we don't have a clock and we certainly don't have a guillotine. So Rose, we're delighted to welcome you. Thank you for being our guest, and I'll hand over to you. And if you want to just check
Good
with me,
morning.
if you just want to check with me at any stage, feel free. But otherwise, if you don't hear an interruption from me, please just continue as long as you wish. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, Garamagat, Mike, and it's lovely to be here with you this morning, and a happy anniversary. I didn't realize it was 20 years. That's an achievement in itself, and I hope you get the opportunity to celebrate it. So thanks very much for having me here this morning to talk about higher education. Now, I want to speak today about structural changes in higher education sector, and hopefully in doing so to be able to present a vision for how things could be improved and indeed how things need to be improved. Now, in the last decade or so, we have seen, in the words of the Irish Universities Association, the state embark on a sustained period of disinvestment from higher education. And this has led to a situation, as was described by Patrick Pendergast last year. The country is sitting on a time bomb. And we need to look at what has led us to that situation. So public funding now makes up less than half of the revenue of universities, a figure that's very important. And this disinvestment has had a huge structural impact on how higher education functions within the state. On a per student basis, we are still far below the pre-crash levels. And third level institutions are given 50% less funding per student than they were in 2008, almost 3/4 less per student. And anyone in the audience less familiar with higher education sector may be wondering how it would be possible to reduce funding by so much without the system completely collapsing. And great credit goes to the institutions and the staff of the Institutes of Higher Education who've been asked to do more with far less. And I'd need a whole other speaking slot to discuss the expansion of the precarious employment conditions of non-permanent academic staff as well as PhD students and the role they play in maintaining our education system under these difficult conditions. But what we can say categorically is that the state divestment from higher education has led to the inevitable and intended effect of commercializing our institutes of higher education and the provision of higher education in general. And this has had a number of knock-on effects, such as the issues in relation to equality of access, equality between institutions, education and research performance, skills provision, etc. And the student-to-staff ratios are widely used as international benchmarks. But while these ratios do not necessarily capture the amount of contact time that students may have with the academic staff or other aspects, they do provide a very useful measure over time. And what we have seen is the student to staff ratios in Ireland have increased substantially over the last 10 years. And this is understood to affect education and research outputs. The ability of, say, Trinity to operate on a commercial basis far exceeds even other universities, such as the University of Limerick. And we look at our institutes of technology, they're not able to match in any way the commercial revenue generation of universities. And one area of equity between the institution is fees. Now, a big part of the state divestment was based on the passing of the costs onto students and families. And this was evident in the fact that we now have the highest fees in the EU. During the same time period, when we saw a huge reduction in the per student public spending fees have increased from €850 in 2008 to €3,000 today. And this is coupled with a variety of additional charges, such as the hundreds for repeat exams and other add-ons. Now, the on-campus accommodation is also an important avenue for revenue for colleges, meaning that rent is determined by the private market and the cost of delivery. Now, fees and rent collectively make up far more than half the total of this expense involved, which is average to be over €12,000. And over 50% of university funding comes from private sources. But this is important as it allows universities to be classified as market producers and therefore outside the general government of balance sheet. But in the years following the crash, the austerity ideology meant that the key metric became the GDP of the national debt. And this created a substantial incentive to keep the debt off the national balance sheet. But as a result, universities were encouraged to take on the debt to reduce exchequer funding even further. And we're likely to see the total debt of universities in the South hit €1 billion this year. Now, this debt is relatively sustainable, but there's a limit to how much debt can be accumulated, and we're likely running out of road. And the action is long overdue in this area. Now, in 2011, the Hunt report was to fund higher education in a sustainable and equitable manner. But when the Castle's report was published 5 years ago, we thought we would finally see the funding crisis addressed. And this report has laid out 3 options for putting third level on a sustainable footing. All 3 recognise the need for a substantial increase in revenue to all institutes of higher education. And the 3 options were about where the money would come from. Now, Sinn Féin and me personally are firmly committed to option 1 of the 3 options outlined in the Castle's report. And this would mean a predominantly state-funded system. It means the removal of fees and the reversal of the commercialisation of third level. Now, of course, we'd want third level to still generate revenue from other sources, but it would remove the commercial necessity from its decision making. It couldn't be done overnight, but Sinn Féin would aim to do it over the lifetime of a government by reducing fees by €500 each year and replacing with public funding alongside substantially increasing the core funding. Now, the Castle's report is now 5 years old, as I said. It's currently under economic evaluation of the European Commission, or more accurately by a consortium of consultants, including Indicon and LE Europe. The LE here stands for the London Economics, the same London Economics that recently reviewed the Auger Review, a fascinating appraisal of the English further and higher education systems that argued for a less market-orientated approach to third level education in England. The evaluation of the London Economics, in my view, was a very narrow economic analysis. And anyone from rural Ireland, like I am, would be familiar with this type of analysis, the type that fails to take the wider social and economic benefits into account. But what we need is a vision for further and higher education that fully takes into account the social and economic benefits. The date that they will report back seems to be continuously pushed back, but we're hoping to have sight of that soon. And I welcome Minister Harris's comments that he does not support the student loan system or the increase to fees. This rules out option 3 of the Castle's report. However, it still leaves the door open for option 2, where fees are maintained. Now, I would urge him and everyone here to reject this option. €3,000 a year or 12,000 over 4 years is prohibitively high for many, and for many way too high. Now, when we look at access, the commercialisation of third level education has a number of detrimental effects, as we have discussed, but one we need to monitor more closely is access and where it is at the moment. Now, SUSI is the main policy tool for facilitating access to further and higher education for low-income students and families, and it's vital. It's a vital support that allows many people to study at third level that otherwise wouldn't be able to study. Now, despite ever-increasing rates of participation in further and higher education, there's huge systematic barriers exist for many students, and these barriers either place substantially both emotionally and financially on students and families, or they are prohibited and stop someone being about to enter third level education entirely. The 3 core elements of the financial barriers to third level are low incomes, high cost of living, and the highest fees within the EU. The most recent available data from the OECD confirms that this has been understood to be the case, and the levels of low pay in the Irish economy are far higher than in any other developed economy. It ranges from 4.1% in Belgium, the best performer, to 24.1% in the United States. And Ireland is on the 23%, the second highest of the countries analysed. Now, annual poverty figures show that more than 100,000 people in employment are living in poverty, with the highest fees in the EU at €3,000, and extortionate price of rent, the cost of living for more students and families, And these are all huge challenges facing people trying to access third level education. So while SUSI is predominantly aimed at mitigating social economic disadvantage, it's vital that it takes into account the full spectrum of additional needs to ensure accessibility to all members in society. The maintenance grant for SUSI was cut in 2011 and hasn't been increased since. According to the HEA statistics, students from affluent areas are twice as likely to go to third level. And there's huge variations exist across the institutions. 5% of students from Trinity come from disadvantaged areas, while 25%, for instance, from Letterkenny. And these figures should be alarming to us, but they're likely do not even reflect the real scale of the problem. And that's because these figures are based on postcodes rather than individual family situations. The survey reveals that most students in better off parts of the city, such as Dublin 2, 4, and 6, and 14, had progression rates of 90% or more. By contrast, individual schools in more deprived parts of the capital, such as Dublin 10, 11, and 17, and 24, had progression rates of just 7%. Now, this means that students from the most affluent parts of Dublin are up to 14 times more likely to progress to university than their counterparts from some of the schools in the more disadvantaged areas. While the reasons for this are multifaceted and cannot be boiled down to simply the cost, I've no doubt from years of working with families and students trying to access or live off supports that the cost is a huge barrier. And while access is restricted from our institutions of higher education, it is certainly a large factor. Colleges and universities are an opportunity for structures for academically talented. When you reduce the size of the pool that you're drawing from, you're reducing the quality of talent that you will get. And Sinn Fein, as an immediate measure, would increase thresholds for SUSI by 10%, as well as the level for maintenance grant by 10%. We would also expand this to online and part-time courses for people with disabilities, complex educational needs, and other life commitments that preclude them from full-time or person study. We currently have a situation where every student in the country is studying online, but if an individual with a disability applies to do an online third level course, they will be turned down by SUSI, something I will be fighting tooth and nail for in the coming months. Now, when we look at research, universities and institutions of technologies are usually understood in terms of three pillars: education, research, and the more recent addition of knowledge transfer. There's no doubt been a substantial impact on students and staff over the recent months, but research has also been hard hit. And the most recent figures up to 2019 show that the government has also spent less on research and development as a percentage of GDP than every year since 2011. And for those of you rightly skeptical about our GDP figure, it's also declined every year since 2011 as a share of our modified GNI, less as a percentage of public expenditure every year since 2012. And even if you're not looking at this as a comparison, we spent 90 million more in 2009 than we did in 2019. And this doesn't even touch upon the issue of investigator-led research versus the industrial-led research. So while we all want our third level sector to be an economic driver, that is not some linear type of issue. Now, third level can best lead to economic development, but I firmly believe that investor-led research is an important aspect. The EU has set a non-binding target for research and development spending at 3% of GDP for member states, and we're a long way off this. Even if we use the modified GNI, it stands at 1.88% as of 2019, with only 0.38% coming, or 20% coming from the public purse. Then the government wonders why we've struggled to develop research and development capacity in the indigenous Irish economy, or why multinationals have been reluctant to move their research and development operations to Ireland. But undervaluing higher education and research is bad for people and for society, but it's also short-sighted and it makes bad economics. The performance of knowledge transfers may also have to be left to another day. But suffice to say, it will inevitably be impacted by high investment in research and development. Now, I want to look for a minute at the North-South. On a more positive note, I see much hope that we will see the progress on the All-Ireland Research Hub. But this is crucial to the sharing and maximisation of our expertise and the benefits of all communities. And as I've said, research and development capacity is a key driver in economic growth and social development. And the fund must be designed to ensure it funds a broad range of research and a variety of grant sizes to encourage wide participation. Now, maximising connection and collaboration must be at the core of its mandate, with a focus on the development of clusters and cooperation between universities across the island. Now, we've discussed at the shortcomings at this juncture, but it doesn't stop there. To date, the successive governments have failed to unlock the potential of integrated all-island third-level education system. When we look at the cross-border enrolment, we can see clearly the negative impact of partition on educational opportunities across the island. Since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, say in 1998, cross-border enrolment on this island has remained unacceptably low. The most recent figures which are available are the 2019-20 academic year, show that 1,588 students from the north enrolled in colleges in the south, while 2,090 students from the Republic attended higher education institutions in the north. Now, overall student mobility has declined in the last 10 years by 18% from an already very low level. So students from the north make up less than 1% of our student population. This is despite a lack of third level capacity in the north. And this is evident in the fact that over a quarter of students in the north go to Britain for their studies, many of whom do not return to live in the north. And everyone has spoken at length about the very real danger Brexit has posed in terms of the hardening of the border. But the border is already far too hard, as figures on student mobility clearly demonstrate. So while partition remains a fault line running through our society, we need to find ways to minimize its ability to separate us. As things stand, we are failing the young people in both jurisdictions. Now, going to uni in Belfast should be the same as going to college in Cork or in Galway or anywhere else in the island. Detailed analysis is required to examine all the barriers that block student movement across the island. However, there's no doubt that there needs to be an integrated application system for all students applying for any college across the island. The New Decade New Approach Agreement commits to the Irish government delivering for people in the north on the basis of a sustainable economic basis. But the investment in third level education is understood to be a key driver in sustainable economic development. So that has to be considered. And a post-conflict educational system must be underpinned and permeated by the principles of the Good Friday Agreement Committee, by parity of esteem, by mutual respect, and by equality of opportunity. The integration of the third level education across the island is no threat to anybody's identity. So expanding and creating education and subsequent employment and enterprise opportunities for everyone, regardless of their religion or their constitutional preference or where they live, is a responsibility that we must all live up to. Investment in the north across all campuses is vitally important, particularly in the city of Derry, where the New Decade New Approach Agreement has already committed to developing a 10,000 student campus. Now, it could be transformative for the Northwest region on both sides of the border, because investment in key projects and collaborations across this region is imperative to the economic prosperity of the area that has suffered the most severe neglect. And furthermore, the development of a technological university in the West and the Northwest is an opportunity for us to link educational opportunities all along the Western seaboard to the Ulster University Magee campus and beyond. We are a small island and we need to do as much as possible to cooperate and collaborate and integrate at third level as much as possible. And this will benefit the sector greatly, and the student, researcher, and our wider society. So we need to look at education on an all-island basis, and we need to ensure that everybody across the island is included in that. I have often said, Mike, there's no point in Irish unity for me unless the mother in Shankill Road has the same opportunities for her sons as I have for my sons in Belmullet. So we need to do much more, but there are opportunities here to do this with our new Department of Higher Education. I believe that we can reset things. And we can reset things so that higher education is delivered as a public good, and that we look at it as an investment for all of us in the present, in the medium term, in the long term, in the future of our nation, if we invest in higher education rather than merely looking at it as a cost. So there you go in a nutshell. Am I okay for time, Mike? I'll hand back to you.
Sorry, Rose, it's just the dreaded getting the unmute button in time. So thank you very much. No, you're very, very good. Excellent, excellent, considering how much there is to talk about when we talk about higher education. So thank you very much. I must say that I was delighted with your emphasis on higher education funding. We're now in our 10th year since Ireland has had the unfavourable distinction of having less funding for third level education than for second level education, which is almost unheard of anywhere in the world. There you go.
It really is, Mike. Yeah, and it's covered up. People don't realize it because the education institutions keep producing, you know, what I consider to be good results and working really hard, and the staff within it working really hard. It belies what's really going on in terms of the struggles.
Indeed, indeed. And can I just say that despite my youthful good looks, it really strikes me, or it astonishes me to know that I've been involved now directly in one way or another in higher education since 1972. So last time I checked, that's 49 years, which is extraordinary. So I've had my hopes raised a lot of times by policy positions, and I have a little bit of scar tissue maybe built up in it. So I'm just wondering, in relation to what you say, I don't think anybody could disagree with 99% of what you have to say. Do you have anything to say in relation to what also always is the bugbear, implementation? In other words, what does higher education cost currently, and what would it cost if your proposals were to be implemented over a period of time? You have that. You may not have.
Yeah, and he's not looking at it as a cost, Mike. We need to look at it as an investment. Now, every year we produce our alternative budget. Now, we have said that this cannot be done overnight, but it can be done over the period of a government, just to bring it back from the 2011, just to bring back from the 2011 figures where we have cut so much. So it certainly can be done, and we have shown in our budget that we can be done. As we're discussing it, I'll produce a few figures here for you. But even if we were to look at now, I know we've looked there in terms of universities, but if we were to look at, and a thing I really think we need to look at, and that's apprenticeships. So if we were to expand access and increase our apprenticeship, say for instance, to 60,000 by 2026, that would cost 353 million, 353.5 million around that. And then if we were to look at, say, to providing more funding for that in terms of off-the-job training that students were to that the state was to fund as well, we'd be looking there at 96.6 million in that. So the money is there for us to, we cannot afford not to. And that's the point I'd make, Mike. We just cannot afford not to. We can, the money is there to do this, and we can't afford not to invest in it. And I'll get you the figures that we're talking, the specific figure.
Yeah, in due course. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it really does come down to priorities and people, governments and planners recognizing where the priorities have to lie. I see we have a contribution in from Joan Donegan. Joan is the General Secretary of the Irish Federation of University Teachers, an organisation which I have some knowledge myself. Joan says, congratulations to TASC on their 20th anniversary. I wonder would Deputy Rose-Conway Walsh comment on recent developments in the reform of the legislation of the Higher Education Authority Act 1971. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the proposal for reform there, Deputy.
Yeah, and in the higher, is she talking about the legislation that's been put through in terms of the accountability of universities?
Yes.
and and that, yeah. I think it's very important that higher education authorities have that there's real accountability and real governance issues there, that there's that they're addressed within that. But there's also autonomy for higher education institutions to also be different and to respond to the needs within their areas. So there's changes that are required in terms of governance, but not to the extent that they lose their their autonomy, and that they lose what they're about as models of delivery. And I think that that can be achieved. And in fairness, I think the minister is open to achieving that.
Very good. Just because, as I say, I have some knowledge of the topic myself, and just to expand to some, I think it's recognized one of the dangers about reducing the size of the governing authorities with a view to increasing accountability could have the possibly unintended side effect of limiting the number of staff representatives, academic staff representatives, non-academic staff representatives, who are normally come up through their trade unions, and also the external local community representatives. Would Sinn Féin propose to lodge any amendments in relation to that to ensure that we don't just become centralised under the central structure of government, central government?
Now, in fairness, Mike, we haven't seen what is proposed yet. So we have to see the draft legislation in that. I have no doubt that we will have a number of amendments to that, but we will work with government and with the institutes of higher education to make sure that the best, that we're not fixing things that aren't broken, but that we are addressing issues that have been there in terms of governance and accountability. And I think that, as I say, that can be achieved. What I wouldn't want to see is the boards being packed with people who didn't have real experience of the ethos within colleges, because I think the ethos needs to be preserved within institutes of higher education, and that they would almost be privatized by default, that there would be people appointed that then would dictate the ethos and the policy. Very, very important that there's proper student representation, that there's proper staff representation, and that the board have a full knowledge of what the Higher Education Institute is trying to achieve. And as I say, I think by working together and by the collaboration and the listening, and I hope that the minister will do that. We have talked about this along the way. So, but until we see, and I mean, I can come back and discuss with you again, until we actually see the legislation, I don't want to preempt what's in it. I know he has talked about maybe changing the makeup of the boards, but I think that there's an agreement that can be reached there that will ensure that everyone is protected.
Very good. I'm sure Joan will be delighted to make contact with you. I'm sure IFOT will follow up with you in relation to that, but as you say, there's lots of work to be done.
I think it'll be a journey. Yeah, I think it'll be a journey over the summer to see that but we get it right.
Yeah. We have another question which has come in, which I think will probably be of interest to Joan, and I'm sure it will be to you. How would the minister deal with precarity of employment among young academics and researchers?
Well, I think it's about ensuring that people are rightfully paid, and I am very concerned about it. I said there wasn't time within to talk about it today, but it's quite alarming to see the precarious contracts that some of the staff working within the institutes are working to. There's no chance of them getting a mortgage or having any type of standard of living or any security of tenure in it. So you see, it links in, Mike, to the overall funding of the universities, so that so that staff can be employed permanently on permanent contracts, and that they can be given proper contracts then in that regard, and that the contribution that PhD students are making as well, and the work they are doing, it basically goes back to workers' rights, and to be paid for the contribution that people are making. And at the moment they're not. But this thing of the precarious hours and people working for years within institutions without having a permanent contract is not, certainly, it is a race to the bottom, and it is not the way to build robust, forward-thinking institutes of higher education. It's kind of, it undervalues the whole model.
Yeah, indeed. I heard Michael D. Higgins speak on this topic last year when he was at an event. I don't think it was an original. I think he was quoting from another work, but he said that there was a time when academics researching precarious employment conditions used to have to do field work. Now they just lean back in their chair and look down the corridor,
Yeah.
because they can see precarity all around them.
Yes, yeah, and I think it creates tensions as well within any working environment where you have people doing the same job. When you have someone precarious with no contracts, or precarious working hours and conditions, and you have others permanent, so that has to be addressed.
Okay, we have another question in relation to Brexit and the implications of Brexit. Do you think that the universities, or indeed the Irish authorities generally, should be doing more to attract more international students as a consequence of Brexit? Because obviously with the market for Italian or EU students going to the UK has been very badly affected. Do you think there's more we could be doing in relation to that?
Well, there's always more we can do, but I don't want to see it in a situation where the institutes are dependent financially for international students, to attract international students. But it adds to the vibrancy, and the diversity adds to the vibrancy of any educational institution. But I think there, in terms of the North-South, or the necessity for better North-South collaboration, both in terms of access to third level and research as well. I think there's real opportunities there. And also, in fairness, in talking to all of them, the heads of the educational institutes, everybody seems up for that. I think everybody I've certainly met to date in this portfolio recognizes the need for all island collaboration, but also East-West collaboration as well. I think between Scotland and England as well. I think everybody has something to add. Everybody has something to add there. And if we look at ourselves even as two islands in terms of Ireland and GB, the family ties across both islands are so connected. I think we need to look at education as well in the same way, that we need to just make it easier for people to study on any part of the island, but also to study to the east of us as well, or to study in Great Britain or Scotland.
Indeed. A number of years ago, my son was contemplating going to university in Edinburgh, and at the same time his cousin in London had exactly the same idea about going to Edinburgh. But due to EU law and there's no fees for higher education in Scotland, there's substantial fees in England. Under EU rules, Adam could study in Edinburgh for free. His cousin in London would have to pay the full English fees. So now that the UK is no longer in the EU, does this have any implications, you think, for your thoughts in relation to cross-border cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland?
Well, I think that we need to, I suppose that's why there needs to be greater collaboration. I think it will, in the interim, there are issues there that need to be sorted out. But I think there's a real opportunity for us here to reimagine third level education across the island. So it obviously has implications, even in terms of whether the Erasmus situation has been addressed for students in the north. But there are other things as well that need to be addressed. But it's like the access in terms of the CAO here and the equivalent in the north, and it's just too difficult. And that's what students are telling us, but we're doing some more research on it at the moment and what the barriers are, and trying to define those to do an all island policy on it. It's just too difficult for people um, to access in terms of points and the entry levels and stuff like that. So we're, as I say, we're examining that at the moment, and then we come up with solutions to how we can address that to make it easier.
And just a point of detail, I'm not sure you know, I don't know, but if somebody going, as you say, from Donegal to Derry, and you were talking about that we don't exploit the potential interaction there, what's the situation with a student from Letterkenny studying in Derry? Do they have to pay UK fees?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't at the moment. They wouldn't. No.
Okay, but that's an EU thing. I presume
No, they
that would,
could get. Yeah.
yeah. So that may change with Brexit, but
Yeah.
it may be
Exactly.
protected by the protocol. I don't know, as I say.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just there's another question in, Rose. What does the deputy think about investment in practice-based training? Some professionals think that the emphasis on academic degrees limits the possibility for children of lower income families to access certain vocations.
Just explain that a bit, Mike. Just,
well, I'm not sure I can, Rose, because as I say, I'm just reading it here as it came in. But maybe if we just read it a bit more coherently, we might. And anyway, the best thing you can do, Rose, is to address it as you understand it. I can't interpret it, as I say, it has just come in online. I'll repeat it for you. Yeah, sure. What does the deputy think? Sorry, no, what does the deputy think? Sorry, there's somebody's coming in and I need for the message to disappear before I could. What does the deputy think about investment in practice-based training?
Yeah.
Some professionals think that the emphasis on academic degrees limits the possibility for children from lower income families to access certain vocations.
Yeah, obviously, I think we need to look at different ways of learning, because not everybody learns the same, right? And I think maybe this is what the questioner is getting at, so that people can, that we can learn kind of on the job training. And I suppose a bit of even what I referred to earlier on in terms of apprenticeships and what we need to do in that area in improving skills through on the job training. I think it's crucially important. And we need, as I say, even in terms of apprenticeships, we look at it, for example, we need to increase the types of apprenticeships that we have. We have, say, 60 types of apprenticeships at the moment. That can be increased by much more than that. We have 19,969 apprenticeships at the moment. Now, that's a lot less than we had. We had 28,500 in 2007. So we think we can increase that. The numbers of apprenticeships have declined over the years. In fact, they've declined, Mike, by 80% since 2008. But we think that we need to expand on them, so that the craft apprenticeships here have done a brilliant job, and people have, the on-the-job training that has been done there. But if we were to double the number of apprenticeship programs to 120, as I said, by 2026, we definitely think that that's achievable. We also think it's really important now, because we're deeply concerned about the number of young people who are likely to be unemployed after this pandemic, and the youth unemployment. And we believe that everyone should be offered an apprenticeship or something similar within 4 months of them becoming unemployed. But also the public sector. The public sector aren't doing nearly enough in terms of apprenticeships as well. I think they need to be more than encouraged to offer on-the-job training like that, and apprenticeships and different types of on-the-job training where people can learn that way. I just want to say that in case I don't get the opportunity of where I believe we're really failing as a state. When I say that people learn differently, we have a whole lot of autistic children and young people who are not being invested in. And I think apart from it being, I think, a human rights travesty of them not having access to education, we are really, really missing out on as a society. The expertise that I have seen within in autistic children and young people, in terms of mathematics in particular, and arts and computer coding and all of that, it is an absolute no-brainer for us to invest in those talents. Um, those talents are more than you and I could ever hope to have. And we need to not have, and that goes back to the original question there, Mike, in terms of not everybody learns the same way. So sitting somebody down to do a leaving cert and to produce whatever they can on a paper is not a measure of somebody's intelligence. So we have to approach it in imaginative ways of how people of all abilities wish to learn, and we have to meet that demand. And I think that we can do that by not just presenting people with one option and saying, well, that's your option now. If you don't achieve whatever in your leaving cert, then you're condemned for the rest of your days. So as the questioner was saying there, in terms of on-the-job learning and all that, that has to be recognized. And of course, while people are learning on the job, like student nurses, if they're doing a hard day's work, they need to be rewarded for that work as well. So we can't just exploit those situations to have cheap labor either, and we need to be conscious of that.
Very good, very good. Rose, we have a further question in from Eileen, who is with the Green Foundation, and she says, please ask Rose, how can the goals for Sustainable Development 2030 be included in higher education?
Well, I think by a lot of the things that we have already discussed there, even the sustainable goals in terms of justice, in terms of access, in terms of equality of access, in terms of how we deliver education, and all of the, I think, can be achieved across the board. Now, the person who asked the question may be much more qualified than me in how they can be delivered. But I think if we're looking at, I think we need to look at it as we have discussed in terms of equality of access and leaving nobody behind in ensuring that people aren't excluded from higher education by making higher education affordable for everybody, to ensure that everybody fulfills their potential in that regard, and also by looking at education on an all-island basis.
Very good, very good. And we have another question come in here. What does Rose think about the adherence to business models within university management? How does Sinn Fein think productivity within academics should be measured? This is a controversial topic for academics, obviously.
Well, that's a very good question. And do you know what, Mike? I have to be honest, it's not one that I have given an awful lot of thought to. So I really wouldn't feel qualified to answer that, because I suppose in looking at all, I've done 4 different papers since I gave in terms of access, and that it's an area I haven't looked at, but it's an area I will be looking at in the future. But I haven't looked at it to date, so I don't want to.
Good. Well, that's a very honest answer, and compared to some of the rubbish that has been said in Dáil Éireann with regard to the productivity of academics, I think academics would prefer somebody to take time to study it rather than. There was a very disquieting debate in the Dáil a couple of years ago, where people either deliberately or just through sheer ignorance confuse the number of hours that an academic delivers a lecture with the number of hours that an academic works. And it's extraordinary that people would make such a stupid mistake, but it was hugely damaging. The headlines the following day saying academics work 18 hours a week, so yeah,
Oh my
there's,
goodness, no,
yeah,
no, no, because we have to look at these things
yeah,
holistically, and obviously there's all kinds of offshoots in terms of value of academic work that's of value to society as well. But how we measure it, I'm not sure. But I'll look to see what models are used maybe worldwide in terms of measurement. Mm.
and this is an interesting question. It might be a good follow-up to my abusing my position as chair to get my own particular issues out. But would the deputy encourage people to go into a career in academia?
I think we have to. Certainly, I know. I suppose from the most recent thing I've been working on, Mike, would be with, say, the young student here in Achill, Catherine Gallagher, who is doing a PhD and a PhD in COVID related issues. And I think you'll have a lot of PhD students doing that. So certainly if people can, and if that's people's wish to do, I think they need to be supported. And what we found in that situation with Catherine Gallagher was, because she has a disability, what the state were going to do was take away her disability payment, because she got a small scholarship, something like 16,000. So she was being forced to choose between having her disability payment and taking up that scholarship, which is a crazy situation. Now, in fairness, Minister Humphreys addressed that very quickly, but there are also wider issues there, barriers there for people with disabilities and other people in terms of taking up PhDs and following through their academic careers. So we have to remove those barriers. We have to facilitate people so that people who have the ability and have the time and are able to pursue academic careers are facilitated to do so, because of obviously the advantage to themselves, but the wider benefits to society. And I mean, the silly thing of somebody being told that their disability payment would be taken off them if they decided to pursue an academic career was just, to me, it was bonkers. And as soon as Catherine came to me, I raised it in the Dáil. And as I say, in fairness, that was changed. And that's actually called Catherine's Law now.
Good.
But we've come across some other anomalies that need to be straightened out as well in that regard.
There's a whole field, a whole book probably filled on bunkers and
Yeah.
taxes. I'm not sure if I'm being unfair. I see there's a question in, I see IFOT has been very active this morning. I have a question in from Frank Jones. Frank is the Deputy General Secretary of IFOT. But I have to apologise, Frank. I'm not sure if the question that I'm going to put to the Deputy is your question. It may be that I'm confusing two things because they came in separately. But anyway, the question I have, which may or may not be from Frank Jones, is what is your view, Deputy, with regard to the protection of people of the humanities in academia? I presume this relates to the debate we normally talk about, the economics of the university, and sometimes those working in humanities wonder, are we losing sight of the value of education for its own sake?
The value of education for its own sake. Yeah, I think the humanities obviously needs to be protected. I wasn't aware of humanities being under threat in third level institutions, but education, yeah, for education's sake is really important. Again, it's probably a subject that I need to look some more into. As I said, we've had so many immediate and pressing issues that we haven't got into the core of that yet since the department since the setup of the department. But certainly, we need to look at education in terms of the individual and the individual's ability to fulfill their own potential, and then to the wider society. Um, the wider society. benefits of education and of higher education. But also we never need to, we should never lose the love of learning. And I think it's something that we need to look at a very younger age in terms of how our curriculums are set up. Sometimes it's like they're designed in a way that you pack in as much information as possible, and then you vomit it out on the paper, and then you're graded according to that. But instilling the love of learning in people from a young age, I think, should be the priority across first level, second level, third level, and fourth level education. So that would be my initial thoughts on it.
Very good, very good. I have one question. It's quite a long question, and I just want to say that to tell our participants that Rose and I had a conversation before we started, and I said that I am a real stickler for starting on time and finishing on time. So it's now 5 minutes to midday, and I certainly want to give Rose the opportunity to have a final fucking score, as it were, a parting word. So I just put this to you, Rose. It's a long question, but I'll let you deal with it mindful of the time constraint. Is access and equality of opportunity merely a sticking plaster for covering up the deep inequality that emanates out of our current education system, not just at higher education, but also at post-primary level, with the postcode lottery for Leaving Cert results? And could adult and community education, and could higher education be transformed with a closer relationship with adult education, as the Maynooth University Department of Adult and Community Education has it: education for a just, equitable and sustainable society that embraces all the citizens equally? It's a long question, but I think it's a
Yeah, no,
pretty hit the point
I think,
behind it all.
Mike, I think that's a good question. And if we look at it, like according to OECD, that adults with a BA earn on average 81% more than those with the upper secondary education, compared to 40%, 44% actually it is more on average across OECD countries. And I talked some about the apprenticeship program and in the traditional crafts one as well, because I do think that is an avenue that has to be looked at. I do, obviously, in terms of it feeds into the inequalities in society, and I think that just speaks for itself in terms of what people can hope to earn across their life cycle. What it feeds a bit is also into the different ways of learning, the different ways people learn. It's to provide opportunities to people to learn from where they're at, if you like. But there's no doubt, obviously, it has been proved over and over again, people who improve their skills, who have a higher degree of education, um, um, have more money to live on in terms of housing, better outcomes in terms of housing, better outcomes in terms of health, and across the board. And also in terms of breaking the cycles of poverty. Obviously, education is a key factor there. And I've seen it time and time again. And that's why I was concerned around, in the years of austerity in particular, where the cutting was done from in terms of community education, community development projects, and all of those measures that addressed the barriers to education at all levels, that the funding was cut from them. And I think it was a really, really bad decision. And I think some of those decisions are coming home to roost now in terms of the inequalities and the marginalization we see within some communities. But that's for a whole, you need a kind of a whole discussion on that particular.
You're absolutely right. We could set up a whole half-day seminar even on that one topic.
Yeah.
It's almost midday. I'm going to be faithful to my commitment just to give you the last word in a minute. Just before we finish up, Rose, I just want to thank the unseen audience out there for your participation, for your attendance, and for those of you who proposed questions. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did, and very valuable. And to remind you again about the calendar of events, I mentioned at the start of the meeting, some of you may have not come in on time on starting on the 21st of this month. We have a very important launch of a report on conditions in the construction industry. On the 26th of April, we have Mary Moo MacDonald, who was Speaker of Rose's own party. On the 25th of May, we have the leader of the Labour Party, and we hope to have the Taoiseach on the date to be confirmed. So we did get a question with regard to the availability of transcripts or recordings of previous conversations, and just to tell people all of these are on the TASC website. Indeed, there's a lot of very, very useful information. So please go to task.ie. So Rose, in keeping with my promise, if there's anything you'd like to say as a final parting word, and I want to thank you for your participation and your attendance here this morning.
Well, I want to thank you, Mike, for having me, but I want to thank the educational institutes and all involved in those for the enormous job that they have done for years, but the enormous job they have done in the last 12 months during COVID, and the student population, and all the challenges that have been presented, and all the last minute announcements and all the changes and everything else. And they have done this as within institutes that have suffered chronic underfunding. And I'm not sure if the wider population understand that. The pressures that they have been under in terms of the extra spaces they had to provide because of the calculated leave cert models and all of that, and being forced being forced with their hands almost tied behind their backs to produce more places at the drop of a hat. And I want to thank them for what they have done in their enormous efforts to accommodate as many students as possible. And I suppose to assure them that I will continue working with them, and indeed with government, to improve the situation there for higher education institutions, and to support them in the great work that they are doing. And the student population, obviously, as well. I want to thank them. I do have concerns around mental health. Again, we could have another discussion around that. I absolutely hope that some of the mental health difficulties that have been experienced by students in the last 12 months in particular are temporary, and that we must be absolutely sure that we don't allow them to become permanent. So that's all I'll say at this point. We have the legislation coming out, but it's important to keep open communications. And I, as the Sinn Fein spokesperson for higher education, and the party are open and available at any time to discuss any of the matters that have been raised here today, and other matters in relation to higher education. We will make higher education and further education better when we work together across the island. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. And just finally, I just want to thank Shana Cohn, our director, for all the work that she's done in relation to today's event and other events, and also Sean McCabe, who has been in charge of all the technical things and make sure that we get out. And finally, thank you all out there for your participation and for your attendance. And finally, thanks, Rose, for the meeting, Margaret. And we'll see you at the next seminar, we hope. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Indeed. Thank you. Bye now. Bye.